This episode contains discussions and personal accounts related to cancer, trauma, and a healing journey. It may include emotional and sensitive content regarding the experiences of battling cancer, confronting trauma, and the healing process. If you or someone you know is struggling or in crisis, help is available. Please reach out to a helpline or crisis service. In the United States, you can call or text 988 or chat online at 988lifeline.org.
Welcome to It's Your Story to Tell. I'm Megan Babcock, and I'm the host of this podcast, and I'm here with my husband, Brian Babcock, and I'm just so happy to share this time with you and allow our listeners to learn a little bit more about me and my family and the things that we've had to go through that were hard. So thanks for being here with me.
Glad to be here. This is fun.
Yeah, it is so fun. And today we're going to be talking about my husband's battle with cancer. And, that happened really early in our marriage, like the same week we got married. So really hard thing to face when you think that you're just getting ready to start this awesome life with someone. It was really hard for me because of my past and the things that I struggled with, and even getting into a new relationship was hard because of my insecurities and fear of loss. And then in the first week, being faced with a diagnosis of acute lymphoblastic leukemia, lymphoma, and knowing that we were going to have to go through a bone marrow transplant and not knowing how it was going to turn out was really hard for me, but I'm sure it was also really hard for you. So I'd love for you to just share with our listeners how you were feeling in that moment.
I would say I was feeling a lot of things, and it was, just a little background on how that all came about. I was walking around and my neck was getting sore, and I had this lump there, and I kind of just took it because I'll sometimes get a sore neck and, try to crack it or loosen it up. And I just assumed I had a really bad knot there and brought it to your attention. And this was probably just a couple weeks before we did actually get married, and your response was, that might be a lymph node. So I kind of begrudgingly, all right, I'll go get this checked out. The interesting thing was I wasn't sick, and that's more of the story as well, but I went and got a checkup with my PCP locally, and he kind of looked at it, and he didn't really think it was either, but to be on the safe side, I had it biopsied. And
you started with an ultrasound, right?
Well, we started with an ultrasound, and then they said, and that was right before we got married, and then they said there should be a biopsy, and so we did the biopsy just shortly after we got married. We got married on May 11th, and in fact, about to come up on our 4-year wedding anniversary.
So excited about that, and our trip to Europe, which is going to be so fun.
Be amazing, and the culmination of this journey we've been on. So went and we got married, and then I had that biopsy, and 6 days later, I got a call from the PCP wanting me to come in, which I knew was probably not great. So I remember calling you and...
Actually, what was interesting about that day, so you guys, we worked together, which was also a trigger for me. But
another part of our story.
Yeah. But we were counterparts in our jobs, and so we worked together, and that day we had met at a Starbucks in the morning, and because I had your wallet or something, and so when you got the call, I feel like we were together or you were coming to meet me, and then we ended up like getting to the doctor together. but we were fortunate that we could be there.
For this diagnosis. So he delivered the news, which you mentioned, that it was non-Hodgkin's T-cell lymphoblastic leukemia, lymphoma, because it affects the lymph nodes, but it's also a blood disorder. And bang, suddenly, like, I'm faced with cancer, and nothing gets your attention more and brings attention to your own mortality than hearing a cancer diagnosis. So I remember, and of course, this is probably the worst thing to do. We started Googling, and you start seeing statistics. But the hard part about that is, and if you ever get a cancer diagnosis, really wait till you talk to people in the know, because when you see statistics, it doesn't necessarily always apply to your situation. And that could be due to age, it could be due to various subtypes and everything that is involved. But that was traumatic. And hearing that news, and here we were supposed to go on our honeymoon. Right. And then on top of it, he had referred me to a group in town, an oncology group that's known and respected. And they said, yeah, we don't deal with that. You're going to have to go to OHSU, which here in Portland is Oregon Health Sciences University, and really the only location in the state of Oregon that deals with what I was diagnosed with. So that was very traumatic early on. And it wasn't until we were actually able to see my oncologist, Jessica Leonard, who I'll give a shout out because she was amazing.
Love her so much.
And she was so calm and matter of fact about what I was diagnosed with and what that would look like, that really started, I think, for me, my journey on trying to face this whole situation with the right mindset. And she really helped with that, I would say.
Mindset is so important. And, she really helped me because, and I talked about this in episode 1, when I was talking about how I got my functional medicine certification, because she had been a naturopath. And because she was now a medical oncologist, I didn't feel so crazy when I needed to be able to do something and contribute and help you. And I had all these ideas, and she supported them. And that was, really meaningful to me, because being a nurse and being in the medical profession, I know how rare that is. And that was part of me coping and being able to be involved in helping to take care of you. And so mindset, for sure, is everything. And it's important to be with a provider that also respects you and honors you and helps to calm you and has great bedside manner. And those are few and far between sometimes, especially when they see these hard things every day. They can forget the person behind the diagnosis. And she was not that kind of doctor, and we were very fortunate.
We were. So, and to continue with that, so when we met with her, she did point out that I was a bit unusual of a case. Mm-hmm. And the reason being, I wasn't sick. This is typically a younger person's cancer. And it's usually very aggressive and will spread quickly to where the body weakens quickly. Like, people that get this typically are affected by it very quickly and get sick very quickly. And I wasn't. And she thought that was unusual. So I remember she wanted to run some additional tests. But because of that, she felt like, hey, go on your honeymoon. If something changes, then I think come back if we need be, and we'll start treatment. But she laid it out that I would likely have to have a bone marrow transplant. Yeah. And we'll talk more about that. And I would say, once she laid it out and explained what the whole process would be, as daunting as it sounded, it also calmed me, because then I knew, okay, sounds like this is beatable. And when you get a cancer diagnosis, it is a scary thing, right? But being a pharmaceutical rep, and you've been in the medical industry, we also know there's all types of cancers. I mean, you could have a skin cancer that's rather benign. You could also have a skin cancer that's very dangerous.
Like my dad.
Like your dad.
Melanoma.
And you could have a recent friend of ours just got thyroid cancer. Fortunately, that tends to be more benign. It doesn't make it less traumatic.
Right.
So there's all levels of trauma, and then also recognizing there's people that get cancer diagnoses that are probably terminal, and I can't imagine that. So there's no comparing. We all deal with bigger, I guess, small to bigger. It can still affect you traumatically, and it did. But I want to point out, though, that once I knew, hey, this is something I can beat, then I decided that my mindset was going to be the most positive I could make it throughout the entire situation.
And I can attest to your positivity and just how strong you were in going through this. And I was blown away by the way you continued to work, which is one of the things that is kind of unheard of because you would go do your cancer treatments, your chemo regimen, be in the hospital. There were a couple of those where you had a longer stay. You had spinal tap chemos. I remember you had a spinal tap chemo and went to a dinner meeting that we had that night. And, I think in some ways that was your way of just coping and staying positive to keep things as normal maybe as possible.
I think so. I didn't want to be just at home and feeling sorry for myself. And I just figured it was a better mindset just to be active and do my job the best I could, even though I'm sure they would have been fine without me. But that was part of it. And I will say, and this is the part where even though it's been a long time, I also had an example of kind of how to handle a really crappy situation from my nephew, John, who told you the story, but he was diagnosed with osteosarcoma. Sorry, and I'll probably get emotional talking about it, even though it's been a long time. When he was I believe he was 17 or 18 in 1999. And he was my nephew, my sister's oldest son. And that diagnosis, again, can't compare things. Everything's worse. But what he went through was, mine pales in comparison. So osteosarcoma typically affects younger people. It was in his knee. He was a terrific athlete. He was actually one of the best swimmers in the state of Oregon. I believe it placed in the 50-meter freestyle in the state in the top 8. And started to have knee problems his senior year, and they just thought it was tendonitis or some other issue. And it turned out, and he was in such good shape, by the time they figured it out, it had spread to his lungs. Well, John, as a young person, you can imagine how devastating that would be, handled his next 2+ years of life with the kind of attitude, I can't even imagine how he did it. He had to have his leg amputated at one point. He continued to swim and kept I know he had his bad days, but his attitude during the whole time, he lived life during those 2 years, despite all the chemo, surgeries to try to remove the cells. They originally thought he would be gone within a couple months. When they discovered it, he actually lived for another over 2 years and passed away in early 2002, and was just such a good kid. And I was like, that kid can have that kind of attitude. Who am I to mope around and just be a victim of the situation I'm in, even though I knew it was going to be a challenging year.
Yeah. That's, I appreciate you sharing your inspiration, and I hope that people listening can be inspired by the positivity and the hope. But you may be in a place where you don't feel hopeful, and that's okay too. There were days where it felt so hard. And there were days of sadness, and there were days of staying busy to try to avoid really feeling the feelings. So, this journey that is filled with so many ups and downs and so many emotions that, you want to be able to be present with all your emotions, the positivity, the hard things, and being able to talk about them. I think it was hard to talk about with you because I didn't want to burden you with like my own feelings and my own insecurities and my own sadness. But being able to be fully present and realize when things were getting hard, and even being able to talk to you about it, allowed me to feel connected to you in the midst of it, and helped me to be able to keep going, especially when the days were hard. So, I think it's so important for you, when you're going through hard things, to be able to talk about them, even when it doesn't feel like you want to talk about it, because just getting that out of, outside of your head and your body and the way you're experiencing it can relieve some of the pressure, I think. At least that was my experience. And then having a community of people, for us, we were so fortunate, your family came alongside of us. Our work family was so amazing, and they took care of making sure we had meals, and we had friends who helped with cleaning and coming by, and that was so impactful for me. I didn't like to accept help because that was one of my struggles, was letting people in and being close and admitting I needed help. But these people made it so I didn't really have an option to let them help, which was great. So if you are a friend to somebody who's going through this, showing up, bringing them coffee, saying that you're going to clean their house, is so impactful and relieves so much pressure. Those like daily chores that you have to do. A lot of times people will be like, what can we do to help? And I'm like, I have no idea. But then I had friends who would just show up and do things. And I was just like, thank you. You didn't give me a chance to tell you no. And I didn't know what to ask for, and you just showed up. So I hope, that's helpful if you are going through this with somebody, that you can jump in and help, because they need it and they might not say it.
Well, and I was grateful for that too. And like you, I kind of struggle with, like, I don't want to be a burden, and which is probably not the best mindset, and that was part of the maybe trauma or fear, I guess I would say, I had with you. Was here we are, newly married, our first year, newlywed year is being completely interrupted by this diagnosis and then treatment. And I didn't want you to be sitting there going, oh my, what did I get myself into? Part of me was glad the marriage was already done. The wedding was over when the diagnosis.
We joked, and I was like, I don't know if we said in sickness in our health.
Yeah,
in our
exactly.
vows.
I think just because of things we've both had. I knew you had in your past, and I had in my own past, that I was, that was one of the fears I dealt with. And probably even at times, would get triggered and then not really triggered by past traumas and fears, and would not always have the best reactions to things as we went through that journey. But I remember we just constantly spoke truth to each other and stayed connected even through that. Maybe the only exception was, during my bone marrow transplant, and I was in the hospital for a month. You get very sick. That's the tough part. Your bone marrow is wiped out by full body radiation and really powerful chemo drugs, and it wipes out your own ability to make any kind of blood cells and then you get this transplant. But for a time, I remember specifically, I was very sick and not really with it for, I think, a whole week. And I know that was hard on you.
So hard. Sitting there, and while you weren't comatose, like, just so people can have kind of a visualization of what it was like. We're in this room and it's dark and you're just sleeping, and not a lot of, not hardly any responding. And yeah, that was so scary and so lonely, because I'm going to get emotional. My fear of losing connection, and I had to know that our connection was strong, and even though we weren't able to connect, and we were going to get through it. And it was not easy time for us, for our kids. Together we have a blended family of 7 children, and there were 3 that lived majority of the time with me. We now have 2, one that's your daughter Brooklyn and my daughter Bella, who live with us full time now. But at that time it was Brantley, Mackenzie, and Bella that were living with us. And so juggling, newly married, we were work partners. So I was trying to keep things going with our doctors that needed things and patients that needed things. Being there in the hospital with you, taking care of things at home. There were definitely days where I felt like, I don't know if I can even keep going. I know I have to, but I don't want to. And it was interesting because I remember one of those days, it was just where I was just I don't think I can go any further. And it was literally just a couple days before you were getting discharged. But I was just a wreck, and I knew what discharge was going to look like too, because you don't just leave the hospital after this.
No.
And things are good. We're good. No, we were coming home to giving medications, and fortunately, being a nurse, I was able to give your meds, so we didn't have to go into the doctors as often. But it was a lot. We couldn't leave you alone. And, you can tell people a little bit about why. But for the first 100 days, we couldn't be more than 30 minutes from the hospital, and you couldn't be by yourself.
Yeah, when you have a bone marrow transplant, you are susceptible to sepsis in particular. And sepsis can come on very quickly. And then because my body was still building, my blood cells and, getting to where I could protect, my body would protect against viruses or whatever the case might be, that you have to have someone with you, basically babysitting you. And the reason being is if sepsis comes on, then I could have lost judgment before I really was able to call for help and get help. And it can be deadly in a very short period of time. So it's for the first 100 days. The first 20 or so of those were actually in the hospital. So it was about 80 days. And another reason we were fortunate to live here in Portland, because I feel bad for people that live in outside of this area, because you have to move and be close to these major hospitals that know how to handle this situation. Now, fortunately, I never had anything bad happen, but we had to treat it as if everything had to be very clean. And we were wearing, I was wearing an N95 mask before COVID hit. That's another part of the story, because COVID hit just not long after my 100 days were over. So it was coming back to, I unfortunately had a lot of needs, and you took care of those. You're amazing, and you are a nurse. So
was I a nice nurse?
And you were a nice nurse. I think probably gave me a hard time a few times, but yes, you're
that
absolutely.
Probably because you were being a bad patient.
Probably was the case, allegedly. But absolutely, it was a big advantage that you are a nurse, and you knew how to handle a lot of the things and needs that I had as my body was recovering, and I was going from wanting to just sleep all day to gradually working with exercise and things I needed to get my body built back up, which took a little time.
Yeah, that was. It was so good to have you home, but also that came with fears, and wanting to protect you, because luckily we had no complications, but they had told us expect them, and so you're constantly looking for. And I remember one time you having a fever and just like, okay, we have to keep watching it, waiting. Are we going to the hospital? And you didn't have to, thank goodness. But that's a rarity too. You went through this, I think, with such a great mindset, like you said, but you also went in healthy. So that's super important. Listening to your body so that you didn't miss that, like coming to me, because you probably wouldn't have gone in as quickly. So men, it's important to do your self-care, know your body, listen to it. Don't delay things, because delaying the inevitable, if it happens, is not where you want to be. You want to catch it early. So being proactive in your health. And then we were very fortunate to have this doctor who helped us navigate complementary medicine. So we knew that you were going to have all of this poison. There wasn't another option. It was bone marrow transplant, or eventually this would take your life. And, we were fortunate because your cancer was even more rare than what was initially thought. And had it spread, we were told it would have been unlikely that you would have made it to a bone marrow transplant, because chemo doesn't work on that.
Yeah, well, actually, we'll finish that part of the story is that, I mentioned I wasn't sick, and that I was, Dr. Leonard had said it was a little unusual. So she had sent my biopsy to Stanford, because kind of like, hey, what's going on here? And I remember reading the report, and it started, thank you for sending us this unusual and interesting case. So there you go.
Way to go. You have to just,
So even for Stanford, they were like, wow, this is different. And what made it different is I had a subtype that had not fully developed into this lymphoblastic full-blown cancer. So it was still cancer, but because was seen early, and because it had not spread, I was not sick. So you're absolutely right. If I had waited, what I was told was this particular subtype was actually far more resistant to chemo and could have been very dangerous for me.
Because if you don't know much about bone marrow transplants, you have to be cancer free in order to get a bone marrow transplant. So that means they have to be able to get rid of all the cancer cells in your body, which they do through a lot of chemo and radiation and spinal chemos. And if the chemo had not been effective and couldn't rid you of those cancer cells,
Yes.
you can't do the bone marrow transplant.
Yeah, so they absolutely correct. So the bone marrow that I received, if there's still cancer there, it just defeats the purpose because then it'll spread again. So the whole point is to wipe out all the cancer and then get new bone marrow that's not producing these cancer cells like mine started to do. So that was very fortunate, and I was healthy going into it. So I think that made my battle a little bit easier. And despite that, I was still so sick during especially the first 30 to 60 days after the bone marrow transplant. This is a good chance to, as I was going through this in the trauma, and I talked about, I wanted that good mindset to go through it. And I know I had my bad days, but I think overall I tackled this with a good mindset. But the biggest fear early on was to have a match. And I ended up with just one match in the world. So just for the listeners, bone marrow, there are registries. Here in the United States, there's one called Be the Match. And for people to go in it, they have to be under the age of 40. And I knew nothing about this really before I had this diagnosis. But they get swabbed, a buccal swab, so on their mouth, and it gets sent, and they go into a database. And people that go into that registry, I believe the statistics of you actually donating bone marrow to someone is only about 1 in 500. So it does show like you need a lot of people in this registry in order to find matches. Now, for me, fortunately, being European, white, Caucasian, it was about a 75% likelihood there would be a match out there for me. And there was, and it turned out to be a woman from Greece who I hope to meet someday. She was 37 at the time. She had donated the blood marrow for me, and I am so grateful to her. And I know she lives near Athens, Greece, so that's kind of amazing. So I have Greek blood, so I must have some Greek background in my ancestry somewhere, and I'm so grateful to her because she was the only perfect match. Now, there are things I do believe they can do half matches, but you end up with many more side effects.
Right.
And even having a perfect match, my side effects are, I'd just be acting like a crybaby if I even talked about them, but I still have some. And so I can only imagine that gets worse if they have to resort to a match that's really not a perfect match. And despite the fact I had a 75% chance as a white Caucasian, I still think about, that means there was a 25% chance I could have been in serious trouble if there had not been, if this woman had not gone and been swabbed, that was my match. There wasn't multiple ones out there. I think for some people there can be. And then just to call attention too, because white Caucasians the most likely to have a match, but there are many minority groups that have a much less chance of finding a match, as low as 50%. I believe African American is even below that. I want to say 30% maybe, without seeing the exact statistics. So part of my message I want to convey for the listeners, if you're under 40, go in the database. You could make a big difference. And
absolutely. Save someone's life. You may not ever be called upon, but we were so fortunate. And your donor gave us a gift of many years together, saving your life. And she did that in the midst of her own family going through things. And I believe it was her sister-in-law that had cancer and ultimately passed away not long after having a baby. And then she was notified that she was a match, and she knew that she had to do it. And, wow, someone in the midst of their own pain, going and doing something to save someone else's life, so sacrificial. And so the least we can do is get into the database. I actually knew of Be the Match because of, in college, there was someone who needed a bone marrow transplant. So I had been in the registry. I actually received a letter at one point in probably 2008 or so, and that I was that I was a match. And I never got called any further because they may have had someone else, or some people don't make it to transplant. And then my stepson had a bone marrow transplant. So I've had a lot of connections with Be the Match before it even came to you. And, my stepson, he is survived and thriving for a very rare diagnosis, and it was a bone marrow transplant that saved his life. And so I hope that our listeners will go to the show notes, that they will request the Be the Match kit so that they can enter into the database and potentially save someone's life. And if you're too old, you have friends, or maybe you even have children who you could talk to about it. So we want to definitely bring awareness to that. And then we're so grateful for our donor and her sacrifice. And it is a sacrifice. It's not an easy procedure. And there's different ways of doing it. And she gave bone marrow versus stem cells, which was requested by your doctor in order to give you the best chance at the least amount of side effects. And she did that, and we will never be able to repay her.
No. That was awesome. And actually, I'll share a quick story too that just recently happened. When I went through this, both the company we were with at the time, they did a Be the Match drive, so encouraging people to be swabbed and enter the registry. And then you had passed out to some of the offices we call on, Be the Match. So when you it's pay it forward, right? I mean, in the midst of bad, let's do good. Right. And that was awesome. And it was just a few weeks ago, and it's been 4 years since my transplant. No, about a little over 3 years, I guess. About 3.5 years. Yeah. So it'll be 4 years in October. And this just happened a few weeks ago, but a office manager at one of the offices that I call on took me aside, and I did not know it, but he had put his name in the registry, and he was getting mailers, for the last few years that his wife would see. And she was kind of like, why haven't I done this? She went into the registry, and within 30 days of doing it, matched with a young girl in Mexico, which is amazing. And she actually flew to Tampa. There's only a couple sites in the entire United States that will pull bone marrow. And she donated bone marrow to this young girl that is likely going to save her life. And that was amazing. Like, that was a pay it forward that happened as a result of my own cancer, and which is incredible. And it's amazing when you have bad things happen, that good things can come out of that.
Oh, so good. You're so, we, in all of these different episodes, we're talking about finding purpose in your pain, and how you can take what you're learning and how you're growing and your experience and make a difference. And that just full circle felt so good that we got to be part of saving that little girl's life because of your cancer, passing out information. And so you never know the impact. And sometimes you never know. I mean, we were fortunate to hear about that, but like you said, we didn't even know who's registered, who ever responded. Like, I didn't know. I thought maybe no one ever responded, but I didn't know. So being able to see that we were able to make a difference in that place has inspired me even more to be out there talking about this and advocating for people to get involved because it's so easy.
It is. And I thought it was super cool that it was Tyler that had gone into the registry and had done that, kind of in honor of me. And he's not even the one that matched, but how cool that his wife was seeing this going, I should really be doing this. Right. And lo and behold, it was a match. And one thing I'll mention, we've talked about how I know who my donor is. If you do end up donating, you won't actually know. Right. They keep that very separate and anonymous. You're able to, for up to 2 years. And you will know just basic details. So I knew the woman was from Greece. That's about all I knew until that time period is up. And then if both parties agree, you can have contact. And
she was able to send a note.
Yes, initially.
We got on the day of the bone marrow transplant.
Yes. So you're able to exchange an anonymous first note from both parties.
And her note was so beautiful.
It was. Can't quote it word for word, but it was very brief, but just said, I give you this gift, the thread of life, I think is the wording she used, and making me cry as I could not read that note out loud for the longest time because it was so touching.
Yeah, she did. She gave you the thread of life, and we are sitting here because of it. And we're getting to share our story and hopefully inspiring people to continue to go forward in their hard things, but also to find purpose and find ways that they can support other people and give back and go forward and make a difference. And, for me, I just want to say thank you for being so supportive of my journey, for helping me grow, for being such a strong and compassionate husband. And you've brought about so much healing in my life. And I'm so thankful that I was able to be part of healing your life in a physical way. But I also think emotionally, we both have grown so much. We had hard things and things that we needed to work through as we have grown in our marriage. And just this morning, you were sharing something with me that I really thought was special and an awesome recognition.
Yeah, I just, with you launching this, and we've obviously had a lot of conversations around trauma and that there's all types. I mean, it just kind of like cancer, there's cancer that a diagnosis you never want, all the way down to kind of simple cancers. And I guess I fell maybe somewhere in between. Mine was beatable, but still kind of a harsh one. But the reality is, as we've talked about trauma and just the awareness around even small traumas that have affected us during our lives and how we've just become more aware together. And I think early in our marriage, and even when I went through this whole thing, like I said, there was things that were probably triggering to me, things that were triggering to you. And we've worked through those because we realized that was more about our past and not about how great our relationship is.
Yeah.
And that's been very healing. And then there's times that even outside of this whole cancer thing where we realized early in our marriage that, oh, I think I reacted to something not because that was truth and what was going on.
I can remember one. And it had to do with, I love that you like to grocery shop with me, or that you love to go to Costco, because I like sending you there because I don't love it. But we had gone to Costco, and I remember we're like leaving, and you know how you have to like check your receipt out, and I think we were walking from the cashier to the walking out, and you're like, whoa, wow, we spent so much money, which was a trigger for me. And I'm like, did I do something wrong? I felt like I remember saying to you, well, we didn't buy anything that we didn't like come here for. And like, if we did, I think you put some things in the cart. But
right.
For me, I was really felt attacked and judged, like I was doing something wrong. And I remember we were driving, and as we were driving up the hill into West Lynn, and I remember just realizing, like, I know where this is coming from. There were things in my past where I felt like there were so many sacrifices made, and I felt bad about them. And that carried with me when then I was very sensitive to money and people's feelings around money. And it wasn't healthy for me because I didn't like to talk money. I didn't like to budget. I didn't like any of those things. And you like to budget, and you like to talk money, and you like to invest. And I was like, we're not going to be able to have these very effective conversations. But just this last year, going into January, I was super excited and even posted about it. Like, we are sitting down and having a planning meeting and working together on budgeting. But it was only because I recognized, like, that was not coming from this place. But
yeah, and it's interesting and whereas I was like, I don't know, Costco's interesting because you never know, like, you're going through and you're like,
I didn't know I
things
needed
in the
that.
go, and I was like, I didn't say you did anything wrong. But then I've had financial trauma myself, so there probably maybe was things where I get nervous about spending or jobs, whatever it might be. That's a whole nother podcast. But we've met in the middle. Like, we understand each other more. Like, I'm not attacking you. Don't trust me. That's not what's going on. Like, we all, in back and forth, we figured that out about each other. Right. That maybe certain things were coming from past experiences. Maybe other things are just like, that's who I am. I like to, kind of have a good grasp of what's going in and out, but it's not because I'm trying to control it.
Right.
And you realize that.
I struggled with control or things like that in the past. And so, yeah, that's why it's so important to have open communication. And then, we are raising kids that have trauma in their life.
They do, yeah.
And this is, we're not through it. Just because we're getting more healing, we had things with our kids that have been hard. And by being able to have these communications with each other, but also being able to give language to our kids about trauma and hard things, and making sure that they have counselors and other people in their life that can help them navigate that. I'm seeing a shift. Like, we're breaking cycles of these unhealthy mindsets.
Well, and I think the comment I made this morning was that we went through some of that where we had some tense exchanges that were, I think, more trauma responses from each of us.
Right.
And as we've learned about each other more and our own and ourselves more, about what we respond to. I was like, I can't even I honestly remember the last like tense conversation, if you want to call it an argument or whatever, where we were both feeling like, oh, like this is, I'm like, I don't know how to handle this. And, it's not that we never disagree on something, but our responses to each other are amazing. And I'm grateful for that. And I know it's a lot of this work around trauma that you've done, and you've even taught me and made me more aware. And that work's still being done with our kids. And I think progress is being made.
And, I hope if you are someone who's listening and you're going through something hard, that this can encourage you, because it doesn't change overnight. But if you choose to not address it, it's not going to ever get better. In fact, it'll probably get way worse. But if you start taking steps towards identifying what's really going on in negative experience, because these, we have these fears, these beliefs, these narratives, but then when someone triggers it, we feel it in our body, we can't think straight. And if you start responding in that moment, you are likely to just traumatize someone, hurt someone. I mean, I've done that. You've listened to my podcast with my son, Brantley. I have struggled with that. But now, as I've grown, I'm experiencing something so different in our relationship, which is the reason to do the hard work.
Couldn't agree more.
And then don't beat yourself up when you're struggling with things, with your kids, because you've likely passed it down, and they aren't going to change things overnight. But as you begin to heal, you start talking different, you start responding different, and they will notice, and they will start modeling something different, or you've modeled something different. So they'll start picking up on those things, but it won't change for them overnight either. And we're in a tough season. I never want people to feel like I have it all together, because I lived that fake life for a long time that made it try to seem like I had it all together when it was all falling apart. Now I'm just honest that it's not ever perfect, and we're always learning and growing, and we have so much excitement ahead of us, and I'm really excited about our upcoming trip. And one of the reasons I'm so excited about it is that it has been on our dream board. And I still have the 2020 dream board, so I'll have to post some pictures as we're on our trip. So follow along on our, social media. This will be already past this episode when we've done our trip, so go back and look. But it is something we have been looking to do, planning to do, and there's so many things on that dream board that are getting to happen all in this one trip, because there was, going out of the country and doing a cruise and bike riding and hiking, and all of that is happening over these 2 weeks in May. And I want people to realize too, sometimes our dreams, like we put them up there and we wanted to do it that year.
Had to hold off for a little bit for
COVID happened.
Yep.
And then, life happens, and we're just getting back to it. So putting it out there and just having it in your mind and working towards it. Don't give up. Don't give up on your dreams, because they can come true if you keep going.
Absolutely. So very excited. Both of our first times going to Europe, and couldn't be a better way to celebrate our 4th anniversary.
Yeah. Well, I'm so looking forward to it. Thank you for being here with me, for sharing our story, your story, and I hope that our listeners will go, and that they will get their Be the Match swab sent to them, and you never know what difference you might make. And if you need support as you are going through a hard thing, please reach out. You can schedule something on my website at meganbabcock.com. Do a discovery call. I want to support you and help you find resources. It's not easy to navigate these hard things, and especially cancer and health things. So please reach out if I can support you, and we just hope that you have a wonderful day. New podcasts every Friday. Listen and subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. If you're ready to start your own transformation journey, visit meganbabcock.com. This podcast is intended only for educational, inspirational, and entertainment purposes. The purpose of this podcast is not to replace the counsel of a physician, professional coach, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional. If you or someone you know is struggling or in crisis, help is available. Call or text 988 or chat 988lifeline.org.